The transport did not dock gently. It hit the clamps of Varan 9 with a heavy, grinding thud, like something inside it had thrown its weight forward at the last second. The station shook. Dust fell from the ceiling panels of the observation corridor, and 43 cadets from 9 different species pressed their faces against the reinforced glass without saying a word. Nobody had been told what was inside. They had been told to report at 0600. They had been told to stand in ranked order. They had been told the evaluation was mandatory. That was all. Commander Voss stood at the far end of the corridor with his hands behind his back and said nothing further. He looked at the floor. That alone was enough to make the cadets nervous. Voss never looked at the floor. The docking bay doors opened with a sound like tearing metal. The light inside the transport was red, a deep, ugly red, the kind used in high containment zones to stop certain species from seeing clearly. Out of that red light came something large. Then it came fully into view, and the corridor went dead silent. It was 12 feet tall when it was not fully upright. Its body was wide and low like something built for crushing rather than running. Plates of dark armor-like skin covered its back and shoulders, layered over each other the way roof tiles are layered, each one thick enough to stop a pulse round at close range. Its legs were 4, and they moved with a slow and heavy certainty. Its forelimbs were longer than its rear ones, and it used them sometimes like arms, touching the walls as it entered, not for balance, but as if reading what the walls were made of. Its eyes were black, not dark brown or deep gray. Black the way a hole in something is black, no shine, no movement. They swept the corridor once, took in every living body standing behind the glass, and then looked forward again as if none of it mattered. There were no chains, there were no handlers, there were no weapons pointed at it, it simply walked. Behind the glass, cadets moved. Not all at once and not loudly, but they moved. The Delvari at the front of the group, a cadet named Oron, 8 feet of layered insectoid muscle, ranked first in combat since the day he arrived, took 1 step back. He did not look like he chose to. His body did it before his mind caught up. He noticed it happen and went very still afterward, but by then the step had already been taken. Others reacted worse. A pair of Sorath cadets near the middle pressed back into the crowd. A young Threshan, whose gaseous body usually filled its suit with calm blue light, flickered amber and then a brief, frightened white. Someone near the back made a sound that was not a word. The beast passed through the corridor on the other side of the glass. It did not look at any of them. It moved toward the containment block with the same slow, heavy certainty it had entered with, and the cadets watched it go and did not breathe properly until the bay door sealed shut behind it. Voss let the silence sit for a few seconds. Then he said, "Dismissed. Evaluation briefing at 1400. He walked away without explaining anything. The cadets began to talk all at once. Dara had been standing at the back of the group. She was ranked last in the cohort, which meant she was always at the back, always given the worst sight lines, always blocked by bodies taller and broader than hers. She had spent most of the observation period standing on her toes, shifting slightly left and right, watching what she could see of the creature through the gaps between other cadets. She had seen enough. As the group broke apart and voices rose around her, she stood still for a moment with her eyes on the now sealed bay doors. Her expression was not afraid. It was not impressed either. It was the expression of someone who had just noticed something that did not add up and was turning it over quietly in their mind. The cadet beside her, a Threshan named Siv whose suit light had gone back to its usual calm blue, looked at her. "You are not speaking," Siv said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. "It's limping," Dara said. "Left rear leg, it barely puts weight on it." Siv stared at her, then looked at the sealed doors, then back at her. "That is what you noticed." "That is what I noticed," she said. She pulled her datapad from her belt and made a note. Then she followed the rest of the cohort toward the corridor exit, hands in her pockets, unhurried. Behind the sealed doors of Containment Block 7, Subject Rho settled its enormous body onto the floor of its holding space and was quiet. The sensor logs recorded its vital signs as stable, its posture as resting, its behavior as non-aggressive. The logs did not have a field for what it was thinking. If they had, no one at the academy would have known how to fill it in. No one except, perhaps, the small human at the back of the group who had already written down that it was hurt. The briefing room was cold. Voss kept it that way on purpose. He said discomfort sharpened attention. Most cadets believed him by now because he had been right about too many things for them to argue. He stood at the front of the room with a single display behind him. On it were 2 words, evaluation protocol, nothing else. What you saw this morning, he said, was Subject Rho. It is the only living specimen of its kind in Coalition custody. Its origin world is classified, its biology is classified. What you need to know is this: it responds to living beings in one of 2 ways. It either ignores you or it does not. Your task today is simple. You will stand in formation in the combat ring. Subject Rho will move through your ranks. You will hold your position. No one spoke for a moment. Then Oren said, "That is the evaluation, standing still." "Yes," said Voss. "And if we cannot?" "Then you cannot," said Voss. "That will also be noted." The combat ring was a large circular space with a high ceiling and a smooth floor. It was used for zero-gravity sparring exercises, but today gravity was on, and the lights were turned to full white. There was nowhere to hide in white light. Every expression, every shift of weight, every small movement of the body was visible to the observation cameras mounted on every wall. The cadets stood in 3 rows, ranked by species combat classification. Oren stood at the very front. Dara stood at the very back. This was, as always, because of her ranking. Last in the cohort, last in the row, half a head shorter than the cadet in front of her. When the far door opened and Subject Rho entered the ring, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even though it did not. That was just what happened when something that large and that quiet moved into a space. The air changed. The light felt different. Several cadets later described it as the feeling of standing in an open field and realizing the sky had gone wrong. The beast moved along the front row first. It stopped in front of a Saurith cadet. The Saurith had 4 arms and stone-gray skin and was known for an extremely high pain threshold. He lasted about 4 seconds before his body rotated sideways. Not running, just turning away, presenting his side instead of his front, which in Saurith body language meant the same thing as running did in human body language. The beast moved on. It stopped in front of a Delvari female named Reth who was ranked 4th overall. She held for longer, 6 seconds. Then her upper limbs crossed in front of her torso, a defensive position, and her compound eyes shifted slightly to the left. The beast moved on. When it reached Oren, it stopped and stood still. Oren did not move his arms. His eyes stayed forward. His body did not rotate. By most standards, he held well. But after 2 seconds, his left foot moved back half a step. 1 step. That was all. His jaw tightened immediately after, like he was angry at himself. The beast looked at him for 1 more second and then moved on without any change in its expression, because its expression never changed. It had the face of something that had already seen everything worth seeing, and found it all the same. It moved through the second row, more breaks. 1 cadet sat down on the floor, not in protest. His legs just stopped holding him. The beast passed him without looking down. It reached the 3rd row. It reached Dara. She was watching it the way she had watched it through the glass that morning, not with locked eyes trying to prove something, not with her chin up performing toughness. She was watching it the way someone watches a bird that has landed nearby and might fly away if startled. Curious, patient, present. The beast stopped in front of her. 1 second passed. 2. 3. It had not stopped for more than 2 seconds in front of anyone else. Oren had gotten 2 seconds before the step. Others had gotten less. The beast stood in front of Dara for 3 full seconds and she did not move, did not blink more than was natural, did not change the quality of her attention at all. Then it moved on. The room was quiet in a way that felt different from before, not the quiet of fear, something else, something none of the cadets had a word for yet because they had never been in a room where that particular thing had just happened. In the observation booth above the ring, Voss watched the footage replay on a secondary screen. He watched the beast stop. He watched it stand. He watched it move on. He said nothing. He made one note in his evaluation log and then closed the file. In the ring below, Dara had already turned her attention to the door through which the beast had exited. She was making another note on her datapad. She had clocked the 3-second pause herself. She had also clocked the way the creature's left rear leg had barely touched the floor the entire time it moved through the rows. Nobody else had been watching its feet. They had all been watching its eyes. Dara had learned long ago that the eyes tell you what something wants you to see. The feet tell you the truth. By the time the mess hall opened for the evening meal, the story had already grown. By the time the cadets were halfway through their food, it had grown again. By the time trays were being cleared, what had happened in the combat ring had become the kind of story that a station tells itself when it does not yet understand what it witnessed. The version most non-human cadets settled on was this: the human girl had not understood the danger. Her species lacked the instinct. She had stood still not because of anything admirable but because something in her biology had simply failed to register the signal. It was a malfunction, a gap. The same way some species were born without the ability to hear certain frequencies. She had not been brave, she had been incomplete. This was a comfortable explanation. It fit inside what they already believed. They held on to it. Civ did not hold on to it. Civ sat at a corner table and rotated a food container between two hands without eating and thought about the 3 seconds. Civ had been in the second row. Civ had felt the beast stop behind the cadets ahead, had felt the shift in attention when the creature moved to the third row, had turned just slightly to see. 3 seconds. It was not a long time, but the beast had given no one else more than 2. The pause meant something. Civ did not know what. That was the part that was bothering Civ most. Oren found Dara in the mess hall and put his tray down across from her without asking if the seat was available. Oren did not ask for seats. He was large enough that seats simply became available. "You want to explain what that was," he said. It was not a question. Dara looked up from her food. What was? "In the ring, you stood there and it stopped for longer." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She picked up her fork. "I don't know that I did anything. It just looked at me and then it moved on." "It looked at everyone," Oren said. "It looked at me. I did not move my arms. I did not turn. I held position better than anyone in that front row and it still walked away after 2 seconds like I was nothing." His voice was not loud. It was very level, which in Dara's experience meant he was working harder than usual to keep it that way. "You are ranked last. You are the smallest cadet in this cohort. You have never placed above 30th in any physical assessment. And it stopped for you." "It did," she agreed. "That is not a satisfying answer." "No," she said. "I know. I don't have a better one for you yet." Oren looked at her. She ate her food. He looked at her for a while longer and then said, "When it stopped in front of me, did it seem to you like I was choosing to step back or did it just happen?" She looked up then. He had not meant to say it the way he did. That was clear from his face. But he had said it, and now it was sitting between them on the table, and the mess hall was loud enough around them that nobody had heard. Dara did not answer immediately. Then she said gently, "Which did it feel like to you?" Oren picked up his tray and left. He did not answer her question. He had, without meaning to, answered it anyway. Later that night, when the dormitory block had gone quiet and most cadets were in their rest periods, Dara sat at her bunk with a datapad and pulled up the containment feed logs from Containment Block 7. She was not authorized to access them. She had figured out the access gap 3 days after arriving at Varan 9 and had not used it until now. She watched the feeds in silence for 2 hours. She watched the beast move around its holding space. She watched it eat, which it did slowly and without apparent interest. She watched it rest. She watched it, over and over, keep its weight off the left rear leg in ways that were almost invisible unless you knew to look. The leg was never lifted fully. The creature was too careful for that, too controlled. But the weight was never fully on it either. And when it had been standing still in the ring for 3 seconds in front of her, for those 3 seconds the leg had been furthest from the ground it had been all day. It had been still, not tense still. She made more notes: old wound, long-term, adapted behavior to hide it, high pain threshold or high pain endurance, not the same thing. She underlined that last part. The following morning, Commander Voss stopped her in the corridor after the early training block. "Cadet," he said. "Sir." "You are not to approach the containment block under any circumstances. You are not to access station feeds you are not cleared for. You are not to make independent inquiries about Subject Row through any channel, official or otherwise." He looked at her with the flat, measuring attention of someone who has spent a long time learning to read people. "Am I understood?" "Yes, sir," she said. He looked at her for one more second. Then he walked away. She stood in the corridor and watched him go and thought about the fact that he had said nothing about the medkit she had quietly added to her supply requisition form that morning. He had not mentioned it, which meant either he had not seen it, or he had seen it and chosen to say nothing. Voss never missed things. He had told them that on the first day. He had said it the way people say things that are simply true. She filed that away and went to her next class. 3 days after the ring evaluation, a power relay in Containment Block 7 failed. It was not dramatic. A single coupling in the secondary grid burned out, and for 11 seconds before the backup systems caught it, 2 doors that were never supposed to be open at the same time were both open. 11 seconds was enough. The 2 technicians working the maintenance corridor at the time heard the door sensors change tone. They knew what that tone meant. They did not hesitate. They were through the far exit before the lockdown alarm had finished its first cycle. Their training said that was the correct response, and their training was right, and neither of them would ever be embarrassed about it. Cadet Fenn was not a technician. Fenn was a first-year Threshen in a containment suit, running an authorized errand to deliver calibration tools to the maintenance team. Fenn had taken a wrong turn at Corridor Junction 4, a mistake that new cadets made regularly because the signage at Junction 4 was genuinely bad, and had ended up in the restricted section of the maintenance corridor when the relay failed. When the lockdown engaged, the seal dropped on the wrong side of Fenn. On the same side as the open door. On the same side as Subject Row. The beast had not charged when the door opened. It had simply walked out into the maintenance corridor the way it walked everywhere, slowly, heavily, with the quiet certainty of something that had never needed to rush. It stood in the corridor and its black eyes moved, taking in the space. Pipes, ceiling panels, a dim strip of emergency lighting in amber, and Fenn. Fenn made a sound that the corridor sensors picked up and logged as distress vocalization. Fenn pressed back against the wall and then sideways into a corner where 2 pipes met, which made Fenn smaller and more cornered, which were both exactly the wrong things to become in front of something reading the room for threat and prey signals. Fenn's containment suit flickered from blue to white to a rapid pale yellow. In Threshen bioexpression, pale yellow meant one thing: overwhelming fear. The beast's head turned toward that light. Its posture shifted. One foreleg moved forward 6 inches. Dara came around the corner of Junction 4 at that moment. She had been heading to the maintenance corridor for the same reason Fenn had, from the same starting point. And she had also taken the wrong turn at Junction 4 and corrected it 30 seconds later than Fenn had. She came around the corner, saw the beast in the corridor, saw Fenn in the corner, saw the foreleg moving forward and stopped. One breath. She did not run. She did not call out. She stepped into the corridor fully, moved to the center of the walkway and put herself between the beast and Finn. Not dramatically, not with her arms out. She just stepped into that space and stood in it. The beast's head turned toward her. She kept her body low, not crouching, but weight forward slightly, shoulders down, nothing raised or threatening. She looked at the beast the way she always looked at it, like it was something worth paying attention to, like it was real and present and worth the full quality of her focus. And then she started talking. Not loudly, not fast, in the same low, even tone she might use to read coordinates into a navigation log. She said, "Left rear leg, old wound, maybe 2 or 3 years by the way you've adapted your gait. The plate on the outer edge has a stress fracture. I can see it from here in this light. The coloring is different from the plates around it. You've been putting your weight through the front right instead to compensate, which is why the right shoulder sits lower than the left when you're at rest." The beast did not move. "That has to be tiring," she said. "Compensating for that long. Everything in your body has been adjusting around one injury for years and nobody has touched it because nobody has gotten close enough to touch it. Or maybe they tried and you wouldn't let them. I don't know which." Behind her, Finn had gone completely still. The pale yellow in the suit had faded to an uncertain gray. Even Finn's fear had been overtaken by confusion. The beast stood in the corridor and looked at Dara. Its black eyes did not move. Its enormous body did not shift. For 4 minutes, nothing happened except Dara talking in a low voice about what she had observed and what she thought it meant, and the beast standing there and not leaving and not attacking and not doing anything except, apparently, listening. Then the secondary lockdown released. The seal lifted with a pressure hiss. Emergency lighting shifted back to white. Somewhere above them, the backup grid had caught up and reasserted control. Finn bolted. The sound of rapid footsteps faded down the corridor in seconds. Dara did not bolt. She began very slowly to step backward. She kept her eyes on the beast. She kept her body language exactly as it had been. She moved back 1 step, then 2, then 3, and the beast watched her go and did not follow and did not shift its weight and did not look away. When she reached the corridor junction and turned the corner, she heard nothing behind her. No footstep, no movement. She stopped and looked back. Through the junction gap, she could just see the beast at the far end of the corridor. It was standing in the same place, and as she watched, it lowered its head, not to the floor, not fully, just down, forward and down like a weight that had been held up for a very long time had for one moment been allowed to be heavy. Then it turned and walked back through the open door into its holding space. The door sealed behind it. Dara stood at junction 4 for a while, breathing. Then she took out her datapad and wrote one more note. It said, "It knows someone finally looked." The incident report crossed Voss's desk at 2200. He read it once, closed it, opened it again, and read it a second time. Then he pulled up the containment camera footage and watched what had happened in the corridor from 4 different angles. Then he watched it again. He had been a coalition officer for 29 years. He had served on 7 stations and 3 active conflict postings. He had written more incident reports than he could count, and he had read 10 times that number. He knew what they looked like when the situation was bad, and he knew what they looked like when the situation was something else entirely. This was something else entirely. He closed the footage and opened a different file, one that was not part of any standard Academy directory, one that required 2 separate authentication codes that he had never expected to use at the same time. The file was labeled with Subject Rose designation, and a security tier that meant most people in the coalition had never seen it and never would. He read it for a long time. The world listed as Subject Rose origin was called Kareth 9 in the old survey maps. It was a temperate planet with a dense lower atmosphere and a high ratio of biomass to landmass, dense, layered, alive in every direction. The survey teams that had gone there 41 years ago had described it in the mission logs as extraordinary. The extraction teams that had followed had described it in their logs as profitable. The coalition had mined Kareth 9 for 17 years. Strip operations. Deep core extraction. The kind that does not leave a planet usable when it is done. The last survey conducted before formal operations ceased described the atmosphere as collapsed, the water tables as contaminated, and the native biomass as 86% eliminated. The report used the word exhausted to describe the planet's resource status. It did not use any word to describe what had lived there. Subject Row's species was not catalogued. There had been field notes from early survey teams mentioning large Guardian-class animals, territorial, non-aggressive, and less provoked. The notes recommended avoiding contact. The extraction teams had not avoided contact. Their security logs from years 9 through 12 were full of incident reports. The security battalion assigned to the final extraction phase had been torn apart in what the coalition records described as an unprovoked attack by an unclassified lifeform. 31 personnel. The creature responsible was subsequently captured. Voss read the detail that came next twice. He read it a second time to make sure he had read it correctly the first time. The creature had not fled when the capture teams arrived. It had remained at the site of the confrontation. When capture teams reached the location, they found it standing over the ruins of a collapsed structure, one of the old survey outpost buildings, long abandoned, repurposed by a group of juvenile creatures from an unrelated native species who had sheltered there. 11 juveniles, all alive. The creature had stayed to guard them. It had not left when the opportunity to flee was available. It had stayed and been captured, and the juveniles had eventually been relocated by a later conservation team. The juveniles had survived. The creature had not been freed. After capture, Subject Row had been transferred to 3 different coalition research facilities over 14 years. The file listed the purpose of each placement as behavioral assessment, tactical potential evaluation, weapons integration study. The file listed the outcome of each placement as inconclusive. The creature did not respond to conditioning protocols. It did not respond to reward systems. It did not respond to pain stimulus beyond a basic flinch reflex that offered no leverage. It did not attack unless actively threatened with lethal force. It did not cooperate. It did not resist in any way that gave researchers useful data. It simply existed and waited and ignored everything around it, and the researchers had eventually run out of ideas and passed it to the next facility. No living being in any recorded session had ever produced a voluntary response from Subject Row. No animal, no handler, no researcher. The file stated this clearly in the flat language of official documentation, and then listed the transfer to Varan 9 Academy as the 4th evaluation placement. Voss minimized the file and opened the corridor footage again. He watched Dara step into the space between the beast and Fenn. He watched her stand there. He watched the beast watch her. He watched the beast's head lower at the end in the corridor after she had gone. He watched it 3 more times. Then he opened his communication terminal and made a call he had never made voluntarily. The channel connected to an oversight board that existed specifically for situations that fell outside standard operating parameters. He had always thought the board was a bureaucratic formality. He had never had reason to think otherwise. The face that appeared on screen was unfamiliar, senior rank by the insignia. The person said, "Commander Voss, this is outside your usual contact pattern." "Yes," Voss said. "I have footage I need you to see, and a file I need you to review in light of that footage, and after you have done both, I need you to tell me honestly whether what this program is attempting to do with Subject Row is something you intend to continue." A pause. "Send the footage," the person said. Voss sent it. Then he closed the terminal and sat in his office for a while in the quiet. On his secondary screen, one camera from Containment Block 7 ran on a passive feed. Subject Row was visible in the lower right corner of the frame. It was lying down. Its left rear leg was extended rather than tucked under its body, the way it usually rested. Extended, like something finally held at a different angle. Like for the first time in a very long time, it did not need to protect it. Voss looked at that for a while. Then he turned the screen off and went to find Dara. Voss gave her no speech. He found her outside the equipment bay the following morning, walking toward the training blocks, and he stopped beside her and said, "Containment Block 7, 1 hour, bring the medkit." Then he walked away. She arrived to find the outer corridor of Block 7 quieter than she had ever seen it. The normal rotation of technicians and security personnel was gone. In their place were 7 people she did not recognize, all in civilian research attire, standing behind a reinforced observation window that looked into the main holding space. A recording array had been set up. Every camera in the block appeared to be active. Voss was waiting at the inner door. He looked at the medkit in her hand and then at her face. He said, "You go in, no weapon, no instructions. No one will communicate with you through the door once it closes. If the situation becomes threatening, the secondary release is on the left wall at shoulder height. Push it once and the far door opens. That is your exit. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said. "If it helps," he said, and then stopped. He seemed to decide against whatever he had been about to say. He stepped to the side. "Go ahead." The door opened. She walked in. The door closed behind her. The holding space was large. High ceiling, stone-gray walls, floor that was textured to give grip to large feet. The ambient light was warm and low. Someone had changed it from the usual facility white recently, because the adjustment panel near the door still showed the new setting as unsaved. She noticed that and filed it away. Voss had changed the light. He had thought about that detail and had done it quietly. That told her something about him she had not known before. Subject Rho was at the far end of the space. It was already awake. It was already facing the door. It had been facing the door before she entered, which meant it had heard or sensed her coming, which meant it had been waiting. She walked to the center of the room and stopped there. She did not move toward it. She did not signal anything. She stood in the center and let it have the full view of her, the medkit in her hand visible and open at the top so the contents were clear if it looked. It looked. The black eyes moved from her face to the kit and back. She did not read anything in that. She simply noticed it. Then she did something no protocol had suggested. She walked not toward the beast's head or its center of mass, but to its left. She moved in a slow, wide arc to its left side until she was positioned roughly 8 feet from the injured rear leg. Then she sat down on the floor, cross-legged, the way she sat in her bunk when she was reading. She set the medkit open on the floor in front of her, and she waited. Behind the glass, none of the 7 observers spoke. For a long time, nothing moved. The beast stood at the far end and Dara sat at the center left, and the room was very quiet. She did not look at its face. She looked at the leg, not staring, just attending to it, the way you attend to something you intend to do something about. The beast moved. It was slow. Each step was placed with care, as if it was choosing which it was. It moved across the holding space toward her, and she did not look up until it was close enough that looking up was simply the natural direction to look. It stopped directly in front of her. Its body was enormous at this distance. The plate scarring on its underside was visible up close in a way that camera feeds had never fully shown. Old damage, healed wrong. Years of a body working around something that had never been properly addressed. She looked up at its face. Its face looked back at her. Then slowly it lowered its head, not fast, not as a challenge or a gesture of aggression. It lowered its enormous plated skull down and forward, past her eye level, until its head rested on the floor between its 2 front legs. Its body did not drop. It did not collapse. It held its position fully except for the head, which was now below hers, resting on the ground, the black eyes looking up at her from that angle. Every person behind the glass had stopped breathing. Subject Rho, the creature that had leveled a security battalion, that had walked through 43 cadets and broken everyone, that had spent 14 years in 3 facilities and never once responded to a living being, was kneeling before a human who had sat down on the floor with a medkit and waited. Dara reached out and placed her hand very gently on the side of its jaw. It did not move. She held that contact for a moment. Then she shifted onto her knees, reached into the medkit and began to examine the rear leg. She worked slowly and carefully, and she talked while she worked, the same low, quiet voice, describing what she found, what she thought, what she was going to do. The beast's eyes followed her hands, but its head did not move from the floor. Behind the glass, one of the 7 observers said something quietly to another. Voss heard the words evaluation program and heard the word unprecedented and heard something about reporting this upward, and he said, without turning around, "Whatever you are about to recommend, think carefully about what you saw today before you write it down." No one said anything after that. Several months later, the Coalition's weaponization program for Subject Rho was officially closed. The reason given in the documentation was incompatibility with tactical deployment parameters. The real reason was in the footage, and the footage was reviewed by enough people with enough authority that the documentation did not need to say more than it said. Dara graduated at the end of the academy cycle. She was not assigned to Void Core. She was assigned to a newly created position, Interspecies Contact Specialist, First Class, and given a single posting. Her assignment record listed it plainly: Primary Liaison Subject Rho, Kareth 9 Memorial Survey Expedition. Status: Voluntary. Both parties. The galaxy had a word for what Subject Rho was. The word was weapon. The galaxy had a word for what Dara was. The word was last, as in last in her cohort, last in the row, last to be considered and first to be overlooked. The beast that had feared nothing had walked past every cadet in that ring. It had looked at each of them and found the same thing it always found. And then it had found something different. Not power, not dominance, not a species that could match it. A species that had looked at the most dangerous thing in the known galaxy and thought, "It's hurt," and then sat down on the floor and waited to help. It had knelt to that, nothing else, just that.